to the Follow podcast. We're in week 12. We are finishing the life of Jesus. Hey, welcome back. If you have been with us for all 12 weeks, there's a special prize we have for you. Glenn will give it to you in his office on Sunday.
Yeah, you deserve a big prize.
No, we're glad you've been following along, especially with the readings, as it's been really fun to go through all of the Gospels in this chronological fashion and see the entire story of Jesus, all of his teachings, all of that. But as we get to this last week, which I was reading half of it in Guatemala, we get into this deep sort of narrative of the Holy Week. And so it's a fun experience for us coming into Easter week because it lets us not skip over Holy Week. Like a lot of times Christians, I feel like we just want to jump straight to Easter. We don't want to experience the pain and the hardship and the suffering and the drama that unfolds going into Good Friday and Easter. But we really have to because of the way we've been reading this. So it starts at I've got Dane Berg with me, and with me as always, Glenn. And so we're going to jump into some of the narrative stuff, and I just want to get right to it, guys. Especially as Peter denies Christ, which is a big thematic element at the end of last week. How do you process the Peter denying Christ stuff, especially as it relates to us today?
Yeah, there's a lot of it too, because it's not just Peter, but Judas is mixed in there, and then also the crowds are. So there's a lot of denying everybody's Christ, turning their back on Jesus, and so I mean it's troubling to read. It's easy to be hard on Peter, but as I was writing in my my little journal there, what are the takeaways for me? One of them, so often it was like, don't be like Peter. Don't be like the crowds. Don't be like, because you just kind of get this constant flow of people turning their back on Christ.
And Jesus has been a rock star up until this, right? People are following him. People are chasing him. People are getting healed. They're pushing through the crowd to get to him. And suddenly everybody, there could not be a more stark difference from Palm Sunday to the end of the readings this week where they're chanting crucify.
In the same week.
Yeah, in the same week. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if I completely, I'm sorry, Dane.
No,
I don't know if I completely understand everything going on there. Some of that is maybe just some sort of spiritual warfare that was really taking place in this, but it also just shows you how fickle the human heart is. We really we're prone to follow the crowd. So when things are going great for Jesus, everybody's in, but when it just starts to snowball, everybody piles on, and I think we're all prone to that.
You know what, there was one of the readings, I think it was yesterday or the day before, but where he's on the cross and they were going to, check to, he hadn't died yet, but the question was asked, they were going to take him down or kill him, and they're like, no, wait, let's see if he calls down Elijah. They're looking for miracles. Yeah. They're looking to see if he actually performed something on the cross. Yeah. It's to me, that was just one of the saddest moments, wow, even at this point, after they've rejected him, after they're there for a show.
Yeah.
And again, it speaks to the humanness, the fickle heart. One of the things with Peter that always gets me, this was Peter's strength area. He was brave. He was part of the whole thing that shows you when you rely so heavily on those areas of strength in your life, that's what betrays you the most. All of a sudden, that's what he becomes, all of a sudden, at the darkest moment, his own strength area fails him.
Yeah.
And he becomes a coward.
Yeah.
And,
One of the things that I thought was interesting as I was rereading the Peter narrative is one of the lines that says, Peter followed behind at a distance.
At a distance.
And I thought to myself, these guys who have been following at such close range, right? Suddenly the heat's on. They're taking Jesus away. He's being tried in front of these authorities and all that other stuff. But Peter's, bold and brash, guy who pulls out a sword and chops off an ear. And yet in this moment, he's like, I'm just going to, at a distance, I'm going to sort of watch and see what happens here. What a strange, twist and turn for a guy. We don't see any of the other disciples anywhere in this narrative right here. So is he the only guy sort of following at a distance and trying to check it out? But yet he still will end up denying, right, 3 times. And the bitter, I can only imagine that bitter moment it says he wept, right?
Yeah.
As that third thing comes down. And it sort of made me think of the 3 kind of responses. Judas betrays him. And Peter follows at a distance. And then eventually he denies him. And I was thinking about just the way that people follow Christ, right? I think we'd all like to believe that we would be the one who would be
Right.
in the trenches, following along, shouting on the rooftops. But the truth of the matter is that some people, even though they've been raised in faith, they will literally betray Jesus. They'll walk away from their faith and say, I don't believe that anymore. Then there's a bunch of us who follow at a distance for some season of our life. And we're like, I still believe it, but it's not. And then there's those moments where we actively deny because it's inconvenient, because it's going to cost us something, because really everything is going to, it's going to end up costing us really at the end of the day. And Peter wasn't willing to take that cost at that moment. And then he's convicted deeply by it.
I agree with you. You know what? It's a picture, all three of those scenarios is really a picture of our spiritual journey at some point. And we, part of following Jesus, we have followed every one of those steps.
Yeah.
And I think it's there by design, you know, to remind us.
Peter, the rock on which I will build my church, went through those steps. And I find that we go through those steps sort of over and over again in our Christian walk. Yeah. Some people do.
And I think one of the things that, can help one another, we can help one another in this journey, is being authentic about that.
Yeah.
That this Christian journey is not, everybody wants to think that everything's always, that it's this straight line and you follow the straight and narrow. It is a rough, you have your ups. Yes, it's a long, you got to think long game. And I love that the book, even the book is authentic with the way it lays it out.
Absolutely. Glenn, I'm sure you've heard this before. I've heard people mention this as it relates to Peter. Is Jesus a little bit later on after the resurrection asked Peter, "Do you love me?"
Right. Yeah.
And I've heard that Have you heard that comparison before? Where three times he denied him, and three times he asked him over and over again.
Yeah.
What do you make of that? How do you kind of pull that picture together if you get into Pete's shoes?
Yeah, I always just think it's a great story of the mercy of Christ to grant the fullness of forgiveness, and not just, he's like, he offers both to agape him, to phileo him, and he reinstates Peter as not just my disciple, but you're going to lead the church. Feed my sheep. And so I just think it's ultimately the grace of Christ. And I've depended on that so many times. I'm like, as many times as I mess up, as deep as Jesus' forgiveness. So
yeah, the one thing that I pulled out of it was he weeps at the end of the third denial.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you remember the wording of this. On the third time that Jesus asked him, "Do you love me?" He's hurt.
Yeah.
He's hurt. Why do you keep asking me? And I could only imagine those two emotions going together from both, things. He's like, he just feels it again over and over again. All right,
but I love, before long, we're in the book of Acts and Peter is leading the way.
Absolutely.
Right? So,
and will to his actual demise.
Right.
Yeah. You can only imagine that's what inspired him on.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have this rejection, Peter's rejection of him. I love that did not cancel out the call.
Yeah.
It did not cancel out the call or God's promise in his life. You are the rock, and so he restores him. He restores Peter back, but he's not going to do anything. Meanwhile, he's walking at a distance until Christ restores him, and then it's full bore ahead.
Yeah. Broken heroes of the faith over and over again in the scripture.
Wounded healers.
Yeah, wounded healers. All right, here's a good question for both of you. Ready? Pilate and Jesus are having these conversations.
Yes.
And what stood out to me over and over again was the fact that Jesus stood silent. So
You're like,
often.
Say it, Jesus.
What do you make of Jesus' silence in some of those situations?
I make of it, one, genuinely a little frustrated because you're like, come on, Jesus, just say it.
Jesus never seems to be at a lack for words, right? He's always got the answer.
And he does imply it. He says, you say that it is. So, but what I see in that is just really the divine nature of Christ to be able to stick to the divine plan.
Yeah.
Hold, in power, still show humility, not give in, that would in some ways really be weakness to, kind of come down to Pilate's level and start to have a little, back and forth with him or with Herod too.
Yeah.
So,
his need to defend himself at that point is second, second to God's will. And could he have made a beautiful defense and declared his innocence and all that stuff. Absolutely, beyond a shadow of a doubt, but that was not the will of God in the moment.
That was not the plan at the moment.
And fulfilling Isaiah as a sheep before it shears its silence. You know?
Yeah, there's a line in John chapter 18 from Friday's reading that says his accusers didn't go inside because it would defile them. Right. So he has these two different environments, one where he's talking in front of the religious elite and Pilate seems to be there as well, and then a separate one where he's almost got this intimate moment with Pilate.
Yeah.
And I wonder, what is the internal monologue going on in Jesus' mind, even though he chooses to be silent in those moments, you know?
Yeah. Pilate feels like he wants to believe.
Oh,
too.
totally.
I mean, Pilate's, you know.
Absolutely.
Oh, I so believe that. I wrote that down like, we obviously don't know anything more about Pilate afterwards.
Right.
But you got to wonder, what does the Roman governor of the province think when the sky goes dark for 3 hours, the temple rips, you know, earthquake, everything breaks loose, and then eventually he begins to hear these whisperings of, yeah, that tombstone was rolled away, and his followers are saying he's risen. Like, there's a part of me that thinks maybe Pilate didn't come to faith, but his wife, who had had the dream, came to faith and said, get on board, buddy. Yeah, he's an interesting character in all of this. But obviously, like you said, used multiple times, right, to fulfill prophecy.
Right.
Yeah. So, what else? What else stands out for you guys from Holy Week and from sort of the readings and this?
You know, one of the things that I jotted down, and I don't know if I even really know the answer to this, is there's just so much material.
Yeah.
There's tons of detail.
Yeah.
And if you think about, you know, how much space is taken up in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John with really the last few days and even the last few hours, you know, I was trying to really wrap my mind around why do the gospel writers spend so much time on that?
Yeah.
And I don't know. You know, part of the speculation I was thinking is, you know, it reminds them of the spiritual battle with someone like Peter or Judas or even Pilate and Herod and the crowd. So it kind of just reminds them of that. But also just reminds them of the suffering of Christ and they, you know, to embrace that. But it just, one of the things that was interesting to me is how much like really precise detail, more precise than other times.
Lots of detail.
Yeah, names and times.
The whole Barabbas part of the story, right?
Oh,
this random interaction of this, you know, kind of tradition of releasing one of the prisoners, you know, and you know, for me, this guy, I don't know if you've ever seen the movies where in Passion of the Christ specifically, Barabbas gets this weird smile, like, I'm going to get off, you know, and you can only imagine what was going through that guy's mind at that moment. But at least for me, that particular Barabbas story reminds me of the culpability we all have. Like, they literally say, like, he's innocent. Like, I don't find anything wrong with this guy. Yeah. But if you want me to release Barabbas, I will. And they say, hey, put his blood will be on our head and our children.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Every time I read that.
Yeah. And so you think about that and you think, oh, yeah, I'm culpable too. Like, it was my sin that put him up on the cross as much as anybody else's.
You know, I read somewhere that someone was talking about Barabbas and they even referenced his name. You know, we know enough Hebrew to Bar, son of Abbas. Yeah. You know, so son of the Father. You know, and so here is literally the son of the Father. You know, Father God, that they're exchanging for. You know, Barabbas was a murderer, and you know, and anyway, it's crazy. Just the name itself is interesting.
Yeah, it is. There's a great line in that song that we sing as a church sometimes that, ashamed I hear my mocking voice cry out among the scoffers. Because that's what, you know, you read it, and if you take yourself out of the story, you're like, what are these people doing?
Yeah, right.
But we're not supposed to take ourselves out of the story. We're supposed to
see ourselves
hear
in
our
it.
voices in there.
And that is the root of, like, I think, such great detail.
Yes,
I can imagine myself in this society at this time. Now, I probably don't put myself in Peter's shoes. I don't put myself in Barabbas' shoes. I guess I more often think of myself in the crowd or maybe as one of the disciples. But the disciples' like absence from so much of this narrative is it screams off of the page. The women are present. You see them listed by name even at the foot of the cross or burying him at the tomb. And yet at the end of the day, it's like, where were the disciples?
Last time we saw them, they were either asleep in the garden and then doubting the resurrection.
Or following at a distance.
Or following at a distance, Not John. John ran out ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. So you get this whole political drama that plays out between the religious leaders and basically Pilate himself, right? And then we end up at the crucifixion, right? I mean, we're going to end up there with him carrying the cross. Simon of Cyrene, who ends up, being forced into carrying the cross alongside Jesus, and Jesus doing, hanging on the cross and obviously giving his life, right? And I'm sure this is true for you guys, but one of the most powerful things is the two professions of faith I see at the cross, which is, number one, the thief on the cross, who says, remember me as you go under. And then the Roman soldier at the foot of the cross when he actually passes away and says, surely this is the Son of God. Like, imagine yourself in that situation. What would you be thinking as you watch those professions of faith if you were in the crowd?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Well, it just goes to show you too. There's so much, the fickle nature. There's pockets of belief.
Yeah.
I don't know if those, the Roman soldier who says, surely that was the Son of God, if anybody listened or not.
Yeah.
Or was it just kind of this isolated voice? But I think, it starts.
Well, John must have heard him.
Yeah. Right. That's
Yeah.
right.
Right. Yeah.
But it does start to show that, hey, there's another way. There's another way. You can be another voice.
Yeah. The other thing that sort of leapt off the page at me is this mocking attitude of everyone towards Christ.
Yeah.
Like, even when you think about capital punishment today, we approach it with tame, very solemn.
Right.
It's so hard for me to imagine these people hurling these insults.
Yeah,
at
all
him.
the detail too. They offer him the myrrh, the wine with vinegar. They offer him they gamble for his clothes. They make fun of him. They
smack him and say, prophesy, who hit you?
Right.
Who hit you? And it's like, wow, again, for Jesus, which was sort of rock star status just a few days ago, it's crazy to me that we've gotten to that moment. All of this is going to sort of lead us to, obviously the cross itself, the darkness, the crowd, must have changed what they were thinking then. But when that earthquake happens and the darkness falls over and the veil rips, again, as I put myself into the thought process of those at the foot of the cross, or the crowd, or even, give me a break, the people wandering around Jerusalem.
Yeah.
Jerusalem is teeming with people at this point, right? It's Passover. Like, everyone's there. This has been all the buzz.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, supernaturally, everything tears apart. What is going on in the minds of those people at that moment? I think it must have left everyone questioning everything.
Yeah.
Yeah, everything's coming unglued. It's literally like a movie, like an action movie. You're like, everything is gone.
Although it's still, go ahead, Dean.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, although there's still a lot of uncertainty about it because they're still not ready for a resurrection.
No, yeah.
And even after the resurrection, it still takes some time. And
It's not like Jesus pops off the cross and then, he's still
strike goes
dead
dark,
as
right?
all of that has happened,
I even think of just something as simple as the veil being torn, from top to bottom.
Yeah.
They make sure that they
Oh,
let
yeah.
you know that
Detail is there.
So it was from what I understand, it was over 200 pounds.
Yeah.
It's not like this thin little.
Nobody had scissors at the bottom and started
this
pulling.
200-pound that comes crashing down, and all of a sudden the Holy of Holies
Is
is
exposed.
to and opened up to the entire world. I mean, that alone just extraordinary, and it's just a one sentence, as part of the narrative, and moves on without any explanation. But the depth behind that alone is incredible.
I try to put myself in the shoes of the religious leaders.
Yeah.
Can you only imagine what they were thinking as all of that happens, and their temple, their holy place is, been shook to its core and ripped from top to bottom. I can only imagine what they were thinking at that moment, and yet they have the presence of mind to go to the Roman governor and say, hey, he said he was going to raise in 3 days. Let's put a guard on the tomb.
Right.
Like, they're still in
Right.
this mode of, we got to protect our power. We got to
Right.
protect our authority and influence.
It speaks to the spiritual battle, what you're talking about. I mean, this is just, we're sitting here watching the physical play out, but this is all driven by a spiritual battle underneath that is incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. Anything else that stood out to you guys? We've lived this story again and again, obviously, as people who work in vocational ministry, but it's just every time I read through it, there's more details that just jump. Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus, these two guys that are from the Jewish council, take this initiative. In fact, it even says Joseph risked it by going to Pilate and saying, could I have the body? Like, that's going to get out.
Yeah.
It's going to get out that I asked for the body. And the religious leader not going to be happy that I asked for the body, probably.
And Nicodemus, who was a part of that group all the way to the end.
Yeah.
A couple of heroes that stand out. One is Simon, who helps carry the cross, and then Nicodemus and Joseph. There are shining lights of the people that are starting to connect into what it means to really be a follower, because Nicodemus had been kind of a hidden follower, we assume.
Yeah.
And Joseph as well.
To try and connect us a little bit to, especially Stephen's sermon on Sunday, which I got a chance to watch in the airport coming back from Guatemala. There's this very, at least for me, visceral moment as they are taking Jesus down from the cross. And they're wrapping his body. And I'm sure you guys in the ministry, we have been there as people have passed away, a lifeless, I'm trying to picture a lifeless Jesus. Someone that has been so full of life, so full of miraculous life.
The author of life.
And they're literally hoisting down this limp, dead body, wrapping it and putting it into the tomb. And then, of course, the Sabbath is coming.
Right.
So they can't finish the job, quote unquote, right? Yeah. And they have to go home. And I'm trying to get inside their heads of what that must have been like. Because we're not to Resurrection Sunday yet in our reading. It's coming in the next couple of days. But how would you process that as a follower of Jesus? How would you process that as Joseph or Nicodemus?
Well, I think Joseph and Nicodemus are paying respects to a dead person.
Yeah, right.
You know what I mean? They're honoring him as a prophet, as a great teacher, as a miracle worker, but not yet as
risen Savior.
Yeah.
And I even think it was just getting them into the tomb, getting them wrapped in the linen shroud, stuff like that. There was a process that had to be cut short. What's extraordinary is that you had these women who had prepared the spices during, and were waiting. They prepared it, but it didn't have time to do it. And we're going back 3 days later. They're going back with decomposition and going to anoint the body.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Comes back to Lazarus, right?
Yeah.
The smell was overwhelming. He'd been in
before.
multiple days. And so just the parallels between what had just happened not that long ago and Jesus himself has got to be, just screaming at these people who are in the inner circle of Jesus, Yeah. Anything that was difficult for you in these passages that you wrestled with or that you...
You know what I just thought of when you were talking about that with going back to Bethany, when Jesus said to his disciples, "Hey, let's go, our friend Lazarus," and the disciples are so frustrated, like they were just going to kill you, and you want to go back, and one of them, I forget which one, I think it was Thomas the twin, said, "Come on, let's go die with Jesus."
Yeah, right.
And all of a sudden they're gone. They're scattered. They are like a shepherd with sheep without a shepherd. They are scattered. But that was really the fear. I mean, even before they made their way there, they knew that this was it, and here we are. Yeah,
Jesus does give this one chilling warning. Every once in a while, Jesus says something that I think, oh, wow, that's, bold. He talks about fortunate indeed are the women who are childless, the wombs that have not borne a child, the breasts that have never nursed. People will beg the mountains, fall on us, and plead with the hills, bury us. For if these things are done when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?
I know.
What do you do with that? I mean, it's got some prophetic nature to it, obviously. But how do you process that as Jesus is saying it? Like, what's going on?
Well, I mean, it just speaks to the trouble of the world since that time. It hasn't gone away, and it awaits his return for things to be made right. But yes, that was a chilling statement too.
It is. Every once in a while, Jesus rattles something off, and you're like, oh, got dark all of a sudden, didn't it, Jesus? Yeah. But rightfully so. This is what's coming.
Yeah, this is what they did with the Son of Man when he was there in real flesh and blood.
Right.
What about now? We're 2,000 years later. People are pushing that away. People can argue it away.
Right.
And
right. So a good way to wrap this up is to talk about how we are doing something new for the first time for our church for Good Friday. And Dane, I want to bring you into this. Obviously, we've been talking about it for weeks and weeks. But we're trying to bring people into that Holy Week experience, sort of in a visceral fashion with all of the senses. Talk a little bit about what we're trying to pull off on Friday so that people can really maybe engage in the whole of the Holy Week.
I'm super excited about this, and I love how it so beautifully ties into our theme of follow Jesus and that discipleship. And we are told that unless you identify in both the death and resurrection,
right.
You cannot celebrate the resurrection without the death. And so this is a chance to really engage in that, to follow him, the last part of the journey here for him, and really follow him through that. And so it's just an opportunity to do that, to remember and to celebrate his goodness and faithfulness, even in dark times, even in the darkest of times for him. That he is. They call it Good Friday. That's such a bizarre
it is.
concept,
yeah.
and really. You have to really think about
it's the worst Friday.
At
that point it was, yeah.
Seriously, yeah. And yet, as a mature believer, as you look back and think, what a glorious day.
Yeah, it is good.
What are this glorious, and yet horrific at the same time. So it's a chance to really go through those emotions. It's my prayer, and I know it's been all of our prayers as we put this together as a staff, that we really would come. We would engage. We would allow room and time to let it sink in, the depth of the love that was displayed for us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Nothing. No, I'm just agreeing with you.
And just walking through that to really let that sink in. And allow that to be the springboard for the rest of the weekend.
Yeah. Why don't you give them like an overview of what it's kind of going to be like for those that are planning to come and be a part of it?
Yeah, so we talked today about just how much detail is in the Gospels, and we won't cover every detail on that Good Friday, but the idea is you'll come, and they're around the traditional stations of the cross. And so you'll come and you'll move from place to place, each representing kind of a different station of the cross, and it's kind of a self-guided tour. There'll be things to read, things to touch, things to reflect on. We've been saying it'll probably take about 45 minutes. You come to the front of the church, and actually you or I will be kind of meet people there when they come, and then kind of direct them through there. But again, the idea is to not just read the words, but to touch and feel and experience and really try to let your senses be engaged in the last hours of Christ's life.
Yeah, for 2,000 years, these have been printed words on a page that we've read and thought through and even imagined, right? Like you're reading a novel of some sort, this last narrative portion, right? But for these guys, it was overwhelming, all-encompassing, all around them. There was tastes and smells. And next year we should do the Passover dinner, and we can all try to dip and see if we can get Judas to dip at the same time as us or something like that. But honestly, there's all these things. So we're trying to bring alive the senses so that you can really experience what it might have been like, just to dive into your senses in terms of that, and then leave quietly and be ready for an Easter Sunday.
And be ready for Sunday morning.
Yeah, with the celebration.
And because it's open from 9 in the morning till 8 in the evening, you can, it's really, you can come by yourself for, an experience just by yourself. You can come as a family unit. You can come with a group of friends. However God leads you. There's so much. Everybody's experience is going to be different. So there's childcare available from 5 to 7 in the evening. So if you want to experience that and still have someone to watch over with your kids, then that's made available as well. So
the nature of this stuff. I mean, it's right out of the Bible, but there's some graphic nature to it. Yeah, well, there it is.
Turns out, if you've read the passage, it's like that. So. Hey, listen, we are so glad that you've been on this podcast journey with us. It's fun for us to talk about the Bible. We love talking about this stuff, and it's a joy to sort of share this reading plan with all of you. Well, I will tell you that we are sort of extending the reading plan. We're gonna load up the app with some more readings that would go into the month of April. We're gonna do Proverbs is gonna be next. If you've never done Proverbs, it's a really healthy rhythm or habit to get into reading Proverbs, wisdom for life, again and again and again, you'll be shocked at how often all of those wisdom nuggets come up in your day-to-day life. And so starting April 1st, we will dive into Proverbs for the month of April.
So we took these first 90 days to say, let's be with Jesus,
Right.
which, but now we're kind of turning the corner a little bit to becoming like Jesus. How do we really have our life transformed and become this new creation, which, he does supernaturally, but
Right.
Proverbs is a great book of, the life of a follower of Jesus.
Absolutely, that we would apply that wisdom. So again, thanks for joining us. We're so glad that you are taking a few minutes of your time to join us, and we're looking forward to hopefully seeing you on Friday. Come through early and then go text somebody that you want to come through with you again later on in the day, and we look forward to seeing you there. So thanks again. This is the Follow Podcast, week 12.